Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. I think something tried to lure me into the woods tonight. By Spooky Penguin. I can't sleep at all since this happened, and I'm honestly not sure who else to share this with because I think I'll sound crazy. But I have to get this out because it's been running through my head, and I'm so chilled and mortified. I live on a big piece of sort of small farmland with 2 homes, the house my husband and I live in and the house that is owned by his grandparents, a short walk distance away. We have a lot of woods surrounding our land, and we get a lot of woodland animals that come through our yard a lot. It's one thing I really love about living here. There's a groundhog family I've gotten to watch grow up that live by one of our sheds that mind their own business and don't bother any of the small crops my husband's Nana grows. Anyway, our dogs kind of just know the territory and walk around freely between the 2 houses in the large field. I guess you could call them farm dogs, but they don't really do anything. My dog is a 3-legged, 15-year-old Chihuahua that manages to get around better than me somehow, and Nana's a really fat beagle who would lick you to death. We're also dog-sitting my mother-in-law's big dog for 4th of July weekend since she's going to be somewhere with a lot of fireworks. He really doesn't like them, and he's familiar with our home. So last night I came out of the bathroom and the big dog started freaking out, like whining, howling, kind of stomping his feet like he wanted to show me something, if that makes sense. This isn't really unusual for him because he gets pretty mouthy when he wants to go outside, so I started going towards the door, which then he started gesturing with his head towards. So I opened the wooden door before our screen door, and he just froze in our kitchen like a statue. My dog then came up behind him and froze too. They both stared directly at me and turned their heads towards the door in sync like they were gesturing for me to go outside. It was so uniform. I don't know how to describe it. Like, it just felt so wrong for them to do. But at the same time, assume maybe there was a skunk outside or something. I went out onto the porch to see our grand neighbor's dog sitting happily on our porch, which made me relax a little. There was a very distant sound of fireworks, so I thought maybe that's what the dogs were so on edge about. Then the fat beagle on the porch did the same thing, looked at me, nodded his head towards the woods like a suggestion. I noticed he was sitting uncharismatically still and wasn't panting or snorting like he usually does. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked around for a bit. Eventually my eyes landed at this one spot, a perfect hole between the trees that allowed me to stare back deeper into the woods a little bit. And in that spot, I saw a pair of eyes open and blink at me. The rest is kind of a haze. I just remember thinking you need to go to the woods over and over again, while urging myself not to do it, like I was having a battle with a rope pulling me. I suddenly looked like there was grass that had laid perfectly for me to walk on, like I could just point out a spot that had been trodden on by feet before. The best way I could describe it is like that one Joti Ito story about the fault where people were being lured into their holes. It was like there was a path made for me to walk to this pair of white eyes staring at me from the woods. My husband knows something was amiss. I guess because he heard the door open and wasn't sure where I was. I always tell him when I go outside to read/sit on the porch for a while. And I just kind of heard him behind me go, "What are you doing?" I remember saying, "I'm just looking." I specifically remember saying that. I would bet money on that those are the words that left my mouth. My husband kinda started getting worried and started guiding me inside, but I remember saying, I'm just looking. He finally ushered me inside and shut the door, turned around wide-eyed and kinda questioned, you do not need to go into the woods? I was really confused. From what I remember, from his perspective, what he should have seen was me standing on the porch staring into the woods. I never mentioned anything about walking out there, just had the sensation that I should move. It was then he told me that apparently I kept looking out like I was in a trance, saying different variations of, I need to walk out into the woods for a bit. I have no recollection of this at all. I've had weird things happen to me before, but this truly fills me with dread. I do not understand what happened, and I'm honestly really frightened about any of us going outside alone for a bit. I really, really feel like there's something trying to lure us into the woods or something. The disease I inherited meant that soon I wouldn't even recognize the members of my own family. Running and stumbling through the woods as the full moon steadily rises, I pray that I can get far enough away from them. A Red Dot in My Parents' Backyard by Anonymoose. This happened around 2003 in my parents' home. They had a big backyard that ended in a small forest. Back then, the neighborhood was very isolated, so it was a few streets and all surrounded by forest. One night, a red light dot appeared in the backyard. We saw it when we were on our front porch, and our cousin was in the alley to the right of the house, looking at the dark backyard. We didn't dare go check because it was super dark and we were scared kids, but we called the adults and they saw it too. The light was about 150 meters from our house. It looked as if it was on ground and would slowly lift up a little and go back down. It stayed there for the whole night. My parents were also confused and scared to go check. They joked about it being un enterrero. There were legends about a burial place where you see a light and it leads you to find gold, the light being the spirits of who were buried. I would think it was a firefly, but I was used to seeing those and they would glow green and yellowish, not like this strong red. It also wouldn't make any sense for a bug to stay in the same place for the whole night and just hover slowly up and down in the same place. That's what we decided we wanted to believe though, that it was somehow a super red bright firefly walking up and down a small plant. We went to check the next day in the morning and there was nothing that could have caused this. The area where we thought it was didn't have bushes or anything. It was a clear patch and we didn't see anything. Then it appeared again the next night. My parents were baffled. I remember several people from the neighborhood and other relatives that didn't live there came to see it, all coming up with theories. My little cousin and I decided to go check, and after we started walking down the alley, an owl scared us and we ran back for our lives. I remember a teenager also walked down there, but getting too scared to continue. I think it may have appeared a night or two more until it didn't anymore, and we never got an explanation. There were no lights in the backyard, and there are no houses to the side that could maybe cause the light to reflect on something shiny in the ground. If you ask me today what it looked like those red lights that the cyclists use on their bikes, but dimmer. At the time though, I had nothing to compare it with. Our neighborhood was poor. People didn't have devices that emitted light like they do today, where it could be anything. Someone with a small radio, phone, laser light, or something. I still can't figure out what it was, but I just have to let it go every time I remember. My first wife fell to her death going skydiving, and it was years until my next marriage. My second wife died from strangulation, because I couldn't convince her to go skydiving with me. The Vengeful Husband by cornmeal-jo. This particular encounter with the paranormal is what I considered mid-grade compared to some of my other run-ins with the deceased. It has all the hallmarks of a stereotypical ghost encounter that I myself might have dismissed as either boring or unbelievable had it not happened to me. And while it was certainly frightening at the time, I've come to the view that it was a very obnoxious interaction in hindsight. In fact, I feel mildly aggravated recounting it. The story begins after I had begun dating another woman who I'll call Stacy. Stacy lived in a double-wide in a large but relatively nice trailer park with her 2 Jack Russells, Luna and Zoe. It wasn't always that way though. Just a year prior, she had lost her husband Mike to cancer. By the time we met, she got into the place where she was ready to move on with her life and asked me to move in with her after just 2 months of us dating. Looking back now, that was too soon, but at the time I was living at the VA after falling on hard times and losing my house, so the offer was too good to refuse. Now, it just so happened that my moving in coincided with the anniversary of Mike's death by 5 days, with the occurrences intensifying the closer it got to him breathing his last breath just a year before. It was around 10 p.m. and was getting sleepy, so I decided to hit the hay while Stacy finished watching her show out in the living room. It wasn't long after my head hit the pillow that I began to drift off. The euphoric feeling of being both awake and asleep at the same time was interrupted by the realization that I was no longer alone, with the culprit standing directly over me or otherwise very close. I jolted myself awake the second I felt this sensation and looked around the darkened room, seeing nothing but still feeling off. I lay back down and tried to ignore the feeling, but then the tapping began. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it might be melting snow or ice dripping from the roof and onto the corner of the trailer. It was February after all. But then the feeling of dread coursed through my body, coupled with the sensation of not being alone once again. It was around that time that I realized I was experiencing the call is coming from inside the house type of situation. That is to say, the tapping was coming from the corner of the room and not outside. Despite this revelation, I was determined to tough it out and hope that this noise would go away. This only seemed to make things worse because the longer I stayed, the louder the tapping got and the more unwelcoming and afraid I became. Every so often, I would open my eyes just a smidge to see if there was some menacing ghost staying over me, and every time, there was nothing, at least at first. I repeated this demented game of hide-and-go-seek roughly 5 times with nothing ever showing itself. It wasn't until the 6th peek that I saw a dark mass begin to appear in the same corner that the knocking was coming from. I practically launched myself out of the bed so quickly and effectively that I probably could have placed at least second in some Olympic event and bolted out to the living room to tell Stacy what happened. Much to my surprise, she believed me, but all she really could say was, "Oh yeah, Mike's probably not happy that you're sleeping on his side of the bed." The next night proved to be just as eventful as the last. Stacy and I were in the living room watching TV and eating leftover Chinese food, while the 2 dogs were sleeping next to us on the couch. Suddenly there was 3 heavy knocks on the adjacent front door. Bam, bam, bam. Luna and Zoe went into bark mode. Stacy and I looked at each other. Who the hell was knocking at a door at 11 p.m.? Stacy reasoned that as someone who was a badass army chick, I was the one that should go check to see who was outside. Of course, I argued that it was her house and made up some ethical traditional dictate that she was the one to go instead. Eventually, logic prevailed, and I bravely undid the locks before nearly ripping the doors off the hinges, ready to confront the asshole who intruded us so late. But there was no one to bitch out. Not even a single neighbor laying their dog out to pee. Closing and bolting the door, we both agreed that there was no way a person could avoid the large, rickety front porch. The damn thing practically rattled the whole inside floor when someone walked up on it. Finally, the anniversary of Mike's death arrived. Stacy chose that day to go through some of the things in his office to either throw away or keep. So naturally, there was some activity. Knocks were heard throughout the house whenever she threw something away, along with a few small objects being thrown or knocked over. Overall, nothing too catastrophic. At least not until that night when I went to bed alone and felt the same menacing presence staying over me like 2 days prior. By this point, I was kind of fed up by Mike's antics and told him as much out loud. Obviously, he didn't like that too much, because the next thing I heard and felt was a loud bang on the headboard, followed by having the comforter being ripped off me. Once again, I hauled ass out into the living room and eventually fell asleep next to Stacy while watching a movie. Things kinda calmed down after that night. Every so often there'd be a loud noise or the feeling of being watched by someone who was severely pissed. This went on until Stacy and I separated 3 months later on bad terms. I had no idea if Mike still haunts that trailer, but Stacy really ought to warn future partners that her deceased husband might terrorize them too. Or, at the very least, piss them off. My father mocked me and threw away my makeup, deciding that we would go hunting in the woods so I could man up. I must say, taking a son who hates him in the middle of nowhere and then teaching him how to use a rifle wasn't his brightest idea. It's been 12 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. By Headless. Recently came across this sub and decided to share my story in hopes that there might be people here with more knowledge or experience on this topic that could help me make sense of what happened to me. I've shared my story with my friends and family, but people never have much to add, just something along the lines of, "That's crazy." When I was 19, my uncle asked me to stay with him for the summer. He had just bought a home in rural Pennsylvania, farmland out in the Amish country. The house and property were pretty run down, so he was paying me to stay with him for the summer and work on fixing things up. It was a large old home and had 2 staircases, one small one in the back part of the house that led directly to his bedroom, and then the main staircase by the front door that led to the other bedrooms. Being a teenager, I used to stay up downstairs watching TV after he'd gone to bed. After a few weeks, I started to get weird feelings being alone at night. I would just start to feel like there was someone else downstairs. Sometimes I would think I heard someone whispering. I would just get slightly paranoid and find myself glancing the direction of the adjacent sitting room that had nothing but a couple of chairs. I chopped it up to the fact that this was an unfamiliar house and that it gets incredibly dark out there in the middle of nowhere. As time went on, my uncomfortable/scared feelings started to escalate. It's hard to explain, but I had that uncanny feeling of being watched when I was alone at night. There were times when I would get up and go into the other rooms downstairs and turn on the lights just to look and make myself feel better. I eventually just stopped staying up downstairs and would just go up to my room and read. Not long after that, the sense of someone else being present began to follow me into my room, which hadn't been the case before. It was like one moment everything was normal, and I was happily reading or lying in bed. And then I would get this weighty feeling of something entering the room and watching me. I just tried to ignore it, and would eventually fall asleep. Things continued to escalate. The presence started to follow me into my room virtually every night. I would immediately notice because there would be this weighty change in the feeling of the room, and the temperature also seemed to get colder. I would lie in bed at night and hear whispers or breathing in the room. I started to sleep with the lights on. The next part is the point in the story that the title of the post is alluding to. One night, I was laying on my bed with the lights on, reading. I was pretty tired from the work we did that day, and was falling asleep earlier than usual. Everything was normal in the room at this point, and I felt relieved because I just wanted to get a good night's sleep. I set my book down and drifted to sleep. Sometime later, I started to be awakened by a strange sound. Lying there with my eyes closed, I could hear something that sounded like rubbing. It wasn't loud, but it was just this constant, faint rubbing sound coming from nearby. I regained consciousness enough to think, "What is that?" and come to, opening my eyes. I looked down towards my chest. I had been sleeping on my back, and found my left hand extended straight up into the air, reaching towards the ceiling. The rubbing sound was my own fingers. They were being played with? My fingers were being bent and manipulated, and the sound was the skin of my fingers rubbing against each other. Directly above my hand was what I can only describe as a black mist/fog, maybe 2.5 or 3 feet wide. Having just woken up, what was happening did not immediately register. I lay there just staring at my hand in the mist for a few seconds, confused. I think this was compounded by the fact that I couldn't feel my hand, so it almost seemed like it wasn't happening to me. Then, like a bolt of lightning, a jolt of pure terror shot through my entire body. I never felt terror before. I'd been afraid in my life, but I never knew what terror was until this moment. I think horror movies actually do a pretty good job of recreating how it feels, with the disorienting camera angle and the music, like the famous score from Psycho. I yanked my arm back and sprang back like a cornered animal, sitting up at the head of the bed. My back and arms pinned up against the wall as I stared at the mist. It just slowly faded away, and then it was gone. That's my experience. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, replaying it over and over in my head. Did that actually happen? Was I dreaming? I must have been dreaming. But I'm sitting here awake. The sheets kicked off of my bed from when I sprang back. It happened so clearly. No, it was real. This really happened. But it couldn't have. I decided to tell my uncle the next day. I had mentioned previously that I got creeped out hanging out downstairs alone. But that was the extent of what he knew up to this point. He actually believed me, or pretended to, and said that he got weird feelings in the house at times as well. He also told me that the previous owner had been an elderly man that passed away. At this point, I only had a couple more weeks left at his place before I needed to head home to get ready for the next year of college. I tried to stick it out, but after 2 entirely sleepless nights, I told him I was heading home early and left. He ended up moving for work reasons a couple years later, and I did visit him once at that house for a family Thanksgiving and did not sleep there. I know this is an incredibly long post, and if you made it this far, thank you. People who have had experiences or have knowledge on the topic, do you have any thoughts? I never had any paranormal experiences before this and didn't really think about ghosts or whether they are real or not. I certainly never thought they'd be able to physically interact with me. As you can probably guess, I'm a firm believer now, but have not had any other experiences and hope not to. My husband and the rest of his fishing crew had been missing for a few weeks when a strange woman appeared at my door. With a grin on her disturbing, fish-eyed face, the woman shoved a package into my hands, and when I opened it, I came face to face with my husband's bloated, severed head. Something woke me up at 4 a.m., and it might be related to several events that happened before. By NotMikeTheNoscoper. This event happened in the middle of the last half of last year, 2022, and in the middle of the first half of this year, 2023. Background story. I, Mike, am a student in Polytechnic of Port Dickson, Malaysia. I was living in a house with 6 classmates in a nearby, somewhat remote small town of Pasir Panjang in the same district. We are used to commuting to our college using several roads with a stretch of about 10 kilometers which runs in the middle of the forest/oil palm plantation. The roads had no road lights. We depended on our high beams when we were using the roads at night because we literally could not see anything beyond 20 meters at night. I have a bike which I used to commute from place to place, just like the other 5 of my classmates. One guy had a car which we often go carpooling in. Now, on to the first story, 2022. Me and my 5 mates went out to eat at night after a hiking trip to a nearby hiking spot on the weekend, leaving one guy, let's call him Chad, at home because he was sleeping. While we were returning home from eating outside, we received a text in the group chat that we made for us. It was from my friend back home saying something like, "What time will you come home? I felt lonely in this house because Mike is still sleeping in his room." It was weird because I was in the car with the rest of the housemates, so I replied, "I'm not in the house, bro. I went with them." He went silent after that until we reached home. After reaching home, we opened the door and saw him crouching in the fetal position by the staircase in the living room with a scared expression on his face. We all were about to ask what's wrong, but he told us what happened. He said he saw me sleeping on the floor in my room, feet facing the door with the lights and fan off. He didn't think anything about it at first until he got my message in the group chat. He realized that it was not me that he saw, and his stomach dropped upon reading my message. He even went to check my room again to make sure someone was there, but nobody was. We were joking around about him, and I even knocked on my room's door to let myself know that I was going in. We didn't take him too seriously, just to calm his nerves down. We don't have trouble sleeping that night, but I'm sure he didn't get any sleep. A few weeks go on, and one day when I was downstairs with one of my housemates doing assignments while waiting for my other housemates to arrive from eating outside, I noticed someone walking barefoot outside the gate. The gate was open, so I had to look and analyze the person walking. It made footstep sounds, but something felt off. So I went over to have a look. I opened my door and walked to the gate to see, but the man was gone. I was curious, so I walked the same direction so I saw it walking and looked along each road at about a 4-way intersection in our neighborhood. The person was gone. It was really quick judging from the time it took me to reach outside the gate, 10 seconds. I went back inside to tell my housemate, who's doing assignments, about what just happened. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm riding my motorcycle alone through the dark road after eating outside with my mates. This time, I'm the only one not in the car with them. Midway, there was an intersection which was the only lit up part of the road, and I was going to switch lanes. So I looked at my side mirror to make sure that there was no cars behind me so that I could safely merge. but I noticed a reflection of a person in white cloth on my back seat waving in the wind. I was wearing all black at the time. I didn't think much of it because I'm more concentrated on my safety on the dark road. As I went deeper into the road, the reflection became darker and darker due to the absence of light in the area, so I kept on riding home without much thought put into it. But as I arrived home, I parked my bike outside the gate and looked at my bike from afar. I didn't want to open the gate because I didn't want anything to follow me to come inside with me. So I waited for my friends to arrive before making a decision. I told it to go away and don't follow me. But I don't know if it worked. I was having cold sweats and chills at the time. As my friends arrived, Chad asked me, "What's wrong?" I told him everything that happened, like the story above. He told me to calm down and advised me to tell it to go away and don't bother us. I just did that and went inside like normal. No nightmares, no disturbances that night. So I believe it was all fine. Ever since that day, I'm getting more and more paranoid when riding my bike at night. I notice this particular smell when riding. It smells like flowers, but it's unpleasant. Feels like you're smelling someone's perfume up close. But the smell does not come every time I went through that road though. Another day, I went through another road that leads to our home. It's been a couple weeks since I last smelled that fragrance. Until that moment, I felt like something was wrong, and I said out loud in my full-faced helmet, "Do not follow me." However, at that moment, I didn't see anything behind me in my side mirror. It was getting annoying at that point. I don't even feel scared of it nor threatened. It just feels like you're being played with. We then went on our semester break, which I attended a camp for a month and returned back to the same house for the next semester. We didn't have any encounters for a good couple of months from the beginning of that semester, until one day I was sleeping downstairs in the living room and was woken up by a voice that seemed to be mimicking the voice of Chad. Wake up, Mike, Mike." I thought something bad had happened, so I opened my eyes, but to my vision, the whole living room is dark, with the exception of our porch light shining through. I did see someone tall standing over me, but I thought it was Chad who woke me up. So I asked him, "What's wrong?" But I didn't get a reply. I then looked at the thing standing over me to see if it was really him. It was really tall. Dark, but I couldn't see a face since it was so dark, and I just had woken up from sleep. I then realized something is off by the unusual length of delay in getting a response. So I told it, "Don't fucking bother me, I'm sleeping." Then rolled to my right and closed my eyes. I then heard footsteps at the staircase. It did not sound like someone going back up to the room, but instead the footsteps sounded like it was going up and down the stairs multiple times. I got annoyed by this and looked at the staircase, with the intention to yell at whoever was playing on the staircase. But there was nobody there. But the sound of the footsteps were still there and continued for about 5 more minutes. Then my friend's watch alarm sounded, which then I knew what time it was. That watch shone 5 a.m., so this interaction happened around 4 a.m. plus. I told my housemates everything that morning. To this day, I do not know what these entities were that were hitchhiking right behind me. The smell, the tall figure calling my name and waking me up. All I know is what I saw, heard, smelled, and felt. Might need to taste them to have a complete experience of the 5 senses. Feel free to speculate what these entities could be that I encountered, or how it might or might not be related. My best friend and I promised that if we're both single by the age of 37, we would just marry each other. Just 3 more years, I mumbled to myself as I stared at her most recent suitor. His untimely disappearance will certainly strengthen her in my relationship. Weird Encounters at Sea by I'm Unarmed Rove. So basically this happened to me, male 25, when I was working as a second officer on board a heavy lifting vessel about a year ago during my watch. Please excuse any mistakes in my writing. English is my second language, and I speak better than I write. The scariest thing I've encountered was during a routine night shift while passing the Atlantic Ocean. I was doing laps around the bridge console to get some exercise while on watch. Second officer from 0 hours to 400 hours, and to relax for a bit. While passing the bridge window, I saw someone walking from aft to forward on the starboard side, which was not unusual, just the time at 01:30 was surprising. The crew was allowed to go outside whenever they wanted, so I didn't mind it at first. When I passed by the window again, after doing a full laps, I noticed he was standing between the cargo hold number 1 and the windbreaker, with his back turned to me, looking towards forward. I stopped to see what he was doing, and suddenly he turned around, looking straight at me. He was starting to wave with his hand while standing perfectly still. This made me uneasy because at this time I started to notice some weird things. For example, he was wearing white overalls, which is normal for officers but not our company. All overalls for officers are rated in red and silver reflective strips on the shoulders. Also, he was wearing an orange helmet, which could have been possible. We have some, but all crew have white helmets. Also, it should have been impossible to see me from forward. All lights on the bridge were off and the deck lights were on, so reflecting when watching from below. So while this person is standing there waving at me, I walk over to the console and grab my radio, and I try calling him. No response. He just kept waving, followed me while I walk around the bridge with his head. I saw him on the starboard side bridge and the radio was on the port side bridge, near the cart table. After calling him again and only receiving static noise, I went back to the light console to turn on the bridge spotlight, which floods the deck with light. I look up from the console and he was gone. So I think to myself, okay, he might be hiding in the stairway to the paint storage, or he's inside the passageway to the forge station inside the windbreaker, and I wait with the lights on. After 30 minutes or so, I decided to turn off the lights, but kept watching for some time, but I haven't seen him again. So the next morning, I asked around if anyone was on deck during my watch, but everyone confirms that they were sleeping during that time, which made sense to me, and it seemed like they were telling the truth. Also, no one owns a white overall, because again, our overalls are all red. Why would anyone walk around on deck at 01:30 hours? We have no safety round and usually no additional lookout who is awake at this time. Usually, it's only me during my watch. Some guys thought it was a prank, but no one knew anything about anyone planning or doing anything like this, not even when I asked them to tell me the truth. I believed them because why would they lie about this? I mean, I wouldn't be mad about it, not going to lie, they would have gotten me good. So I would have been laughing together with the pranksters, but no one said anything like it or admitted to it, even months later. What really freaked me out about this is the stiff movement of the person and the sudden staring while standing still. I can't explain what I saw, and I have no reasonable explanation to this day because no one will admit to pranking me or going on deck at that time. Also, the sudden disappearance when turning on the floodlight is still unexplainable. I also checked the spot where I saw the person, and there's no evidence of hiding anywhere. The paint store stairway and the other store was locked every evening, and it was still locked when I checked it the next morning. So yeah, this is the only experience I've had while working at sea for the last 5 years. I still can't explain what I saw. I don't believe it was some hallucination, because I saw him for at least 5 minutes, from walking to the forward and standing in the forward looking at me, and turned away a few times to grab the radio or walk to the console. He only disappeared when I turned on the floodlight, but this was the only time I saw anything like it. Could somebody help me close this window? I think it's stuck, I called out to my friends in the other room. When all of a sudden the window gave way and proceeded to crush every bone in my hands as they were crushed into the window sill. My Paranormal Events by gogodagorilla. To give some info, I'm 14 male and I'm Catholic. These help you to know how I felt during the events of this post. 1. Hammy. Hammy was my first hamster and my only pet for a while because my dog lives at my grandma's house because my mom would constantly jump from house to house. One day I was getting ready for school and I noticed Hammy was looking tired and seemed sick. I told my mom and she said she would get some medicine for him later that day. I got home and noticed Hammy wasn't in his cage. I told my mom and she said Hammy died. I was deeply saddened. It was my first time ever losing any of my pets and I cried. Now, one of the reasons I loved Hammy so much was that he made me feel safe at night. I was about 6 during this time and I couldn't sleep in silence. There had to be a constant noise like the air conditioning. Hammy would stay up running in his hamster wheel, letting me sleep in peace. After Hammy's passing, for the next 2 weeks, I still heard the hamster wheel running, as if he was giving me 2 weeks of safety in the night. A lot of stuff and spiritual stuff happened in that trailer that I lived in for a while. 2. Brother. I have 3 siblings, 2 alive and 1 passed. My brother lived for only 2 hours. He passed in 2008, a year before I was born. My mother had told me about him when I was 4, and I told my sister when she was 3. One day, my sister and I were playing in our room. We saw a piece of rolled up paper slowly float above us and moved all the way to our closet and into one of the containers that we kept our toys in, and then dropped. We told our mom, and she didn't believe me. They got mad at me, saying I scared my sister. Me and my sister always referred to this as our brother visiting us. This event happened only a few days after we took a framed picture of him into our house. And while now being more strong in my faith, I don't know what it was and pretty sure it wasn't him. This memory always reopens when me and my sister talk about stuff. 3. Weird apparitions and voices. These are more recent. First apparition is one of my mom in a completely different part of the house. I got home after riding my bike when I was 7 to 8. I saw my mom in the kitchen and heard a voice say, "Come here," for about 5 seconds before my actual mom called me. I told my mom about it and she said something like, "They're trying to get you." Now, that's the last of the paranormal events that happened in that house because shortly after my mom's second divorce, we moved out to my grandma's during COVID. Then my mom was having my second sister and we moved to a new house in a bigger city, where I currently live. That leads us to the last events. 4. Voices and whistles. My mom calls me by whistling or calling my name. At the time, I'll hear these and not like faintly, like she's actually calling me. It happens even when she isn't home. But the worst one happened about 2 years back. My mom, my current stepdad, and my youngest sister were out to get some bread from a bakery. I was alone in my room. Then I heard my family talking, and even the sound of my sister as they walked up the porch stairs, and I waited for them to knock. I was right next to the door, so I could open it as soon as they did. I waited for about 3 minutes, but they never did. I looked out the window, but no one was there, not even our car. It was very vivid and accurate. It genuinely sounded like they were outside. It scared me, so I went to my room. After a while, I heard it again. I could hear my stepdad talking with my mom, but they weren't there. I prayed and it stopped. Strangely, at the same time, both my mom and stepdad were unable to be called during this as I tried calling them. When they got home, I told my mom everything and she said, "That's weird." Final paranormal event. 5. Ave Maria. Like I said, I'm Catholic, born, baptized, raised, took communion, and will die Catholic. It was late at night and I should have been asleep. I went to the restroom and walked back to my room. I felt like I was being watched and felt something was near me. I ignored it and walked back to my room. I prayed a Hail Mary, and during that I smelled roses. Now roses are associated with the Blessed Mother. I prayed feeling safe. It was as if Mary was reassuring me I was safe. She was keeping whatever was out there so it couldn't get me. I slept feeling safe and protected. When I was a child, I would sprint up the stairs from our creepy basement, convinced I was being chased by an unseen horror. Returning as an adult, I confronted my childhood fears and descended the stairs, only to hear a chilling voice in the shadows whisper, "You're too slow to escape now." Three knocks and a lady repeatedly screaming. By randokoko. First time posting here, and this is not my only paranormal experience, just the most recent. It happened on November the 16th of 2023, around 3:26 a.m. in Toronto, Canada. I woke up and heard a lady on the streets just yelling, "Please help me," on repeat. I'm on around the 12th floor, so the sound was coming from down on the streets. Initially, I didn't think much of it, but from the moment I woke up, I already felt something wasn't right. And within 5 seconds of me getting up, I heard 3 knocks on my wall, and that sent chills down my spine. At that point, I got scared and knew something is definitely not right with this. My thought process is, do I want to help the lady? Maybe, but I feel this is more an invitation call. If I were to go to my balcony and look, I feel like I might accidentally fall for the spiritual trap. But then, what if she did need help? Am I a bad/scaredy cat and just ignore a person in need? So I just waited and listened. She didn't say anything else, just repeated and repeated, "Please help me." Another thought I have was, if she really needed help, there are several condos with security guards in the lobby looking out, and she'd be able to ask any of them to call the police. I know she's not in danger, because if she was in danger of getting attacked, she would enter any of the condos to hide and get security to help her quickly. The most interesting thing, which reinforced my thoughts of it being paranormal besides the 3 knocks, was that when I stopped focusing on the screams, I can hear the screams as cats meow. At that point, I just prayed for protection, going on Google for the Lord's Prayer and YouTube for other prayers, asking God and Jesus to protect my space and my soul. That made me feel better, but the scream was still going. After about 10 to 15 minutes, her screams faded away, so I just went back to sleep. I know a lot of people will think that they won't be able to go back to sleep. For me, I can, because this is not my first time I dealt with the paranormal. I used to need a nightlight or someone there to watch me when I was sleeping when I was a kid. But after seeing a ghost for the first time, then I was actually able to sleep without a nightlight, which is kinda in the reverse. I could go back to sleep because my faith is strong. Mind you, I was still scared throughout, but I experienced this type of evil shit before, and God in the Bible prayer did help me with that as well, so I felt it to be fine this time as well. One last interesting thing for the night was my dream after. There were no ghosts or demons in my dream. It was just me and my condo, but with a lot of clutter. In the dream, I quickly realized I was in a dream and wanted to wake up, but I couldn't. I had to put a lot of focus and energy to wake back up. It was around 4:30 a.m. at this point. From my Chinese background, I know when someone calls your name at night, don't answer it. Also, from other Western paranormal shows and stories, I understand the 3 knocks are a request to enter your spiritual space. I don't know what I did to even cause this to happen. I was not watching horror or doing some witchy shit or even a Ouija board. I wasn't even thinking about the paranormal. The only thing I can think of for this to happen is my mom's in China right now, and she loves going to spiritualists and temples and getting readings and talismans. I hope she's not the cause for this, but I will be asking her what she did when she gets back and what she was doing exactly on November 15th to 16th. Just wanted to share my experience and ask if anyone experienced the 3 knocks and what do you do or not do after. Maybe I'm overthinking and it's nothing, or maybe it's another paranormal experience. After finding several half-eaten apples, he hid inside the pantry during the night to see which of his kids was responsible. No one came to eat the apples that night, but unfortunately when he visited the doctor due to abdominal pain the next day, they informed him half of his liver was missing. My cat came to say he approves, by Diligent Hedgehog 129. I just wanted to share this with someone, but I wasn't sure who. I've been very lonely lately and questioning if I made the right decisions. I moved to a new part of town recently and started a new job. I have thought several times about how I love my new house and job. And then I thought about how I live alone and struggle with creating any kinds of relationships. It's only me and my dog. I've often felt the only constants in my life are my dog and my dad. Even though I want to throttle him sometimes, I love my dad so much and I know he loves me. I could never doubt it. He makes it so clear with his words and his actions. However, I find myself wondering if I'm where I'm supposed to be. It seems like everyone my age has spouses and kids, family, established ways of life, aren't only friends with their parents, etc. And my life doesn't feel like it has any kind of order or is established. Very much, am I good enough? My cat, we'll call him Whiskers, died several years ago during a time when it felt like my life was falling apart. Whiskers was my first ever pet. I had him from age 5 to 22. My family had this kind of running joke that he was my cat because our personalities matched so well. He died naturally, just old age. But he was the sweetest cat. Every person that got to meet him commented on it. I miss him so much. My dad wanted to go out to dinner with me tonight after work. He picked me up, so when he dropped me back off at my house, I asked if he wanted to go with me to walk my dog. Of course he said yes. I was happy that I got to show him the neighborhood and a little park next to my house. We kept talking about how much we both liked the area and all the cute little houses nearby. Then we began to go down a little street at the insistence of my dog, which I assumed just wanted to explore. While walking down it, a cat sprinted out of the total dark towards us, meowing. He came running up to us, wanting us to pet him. Fully meowing, laying out our hands, purring, even pawing at my dad's leg. He even rubbed up against my dog a few times. I have walked down this street several times and never seen any cats. He looked just like Whiskers, a large gray cat with green eyes. He had spots of fur missing like he got in some fights. Whiskers was a big hunter, always getting into fights. The cat's nose was also dripping, a signature of Whiskers during any time of the year. He walked with us down the rest of the street, and when he turned around, he walked back until he got even with the yard he ran from. Then he stopped and watched us walk to the end of the street. He acted like he was going to start following us again, but stopped. He watched us with his full attention the whole time. We looked back at one point, and he was just a little speck, but definitely still watching. It seems a lot like I met just a really curious, friendly kitty on our walk, but it was crazy how much he reminded me of Whiskers. It felt like seeing him again. He was like he came to see me with my little family of sorts in my new home to say he approves. He likes it here and he recognizes me. Whiskers always reminded me of my previous life and happiness I felt like I had lost, and he came back to see my new life. Update: I saw new Whiskers again last night after trying for several weeks. He wasn't nearly as talkative or affectionate, but he still wanted to hang out. I sat on the sidewalk for a few minutes and he wanted me to pet him. Then I brought out the treats I had and another kitty friend came out. Me and my Shih Tzu and both cats probably sat on the sidewalk for about 20 minutes just hanging out. Definitely someone's pet. The house he came from had a porch light on last night and there was plenty of kids' toys and things. If he's a lot like Whiskers, he's a good family cat and super smart. In reality, it was super cold the night me and my dad were out and the kitty probably heard us talking and thought we would help him get inside. But I like to think Whiskers talked to him a bit and told him to come see us. Or maybe he has a new family and taken care of and just wanted me to know that I'm okay now. Plus, I like that he kinda introduced me to his neighbor that also let me pet it. I love cats. The hooded man gave me a bell and told me every time I rang it, I would receive 100 gold coins. But there would be a cumulative cost that wouldn't directly affect me. I'm not the smartest man, so it took me quite literally until I was the only one left on Earth before I realized the price of the bell. And now I sit, tears streaming, my trembling hand ready to ring it one final time. My girlfriend saw my uncle's death by Soggy Toast from the Tub. This has always struck me as being a bit weird, and I'm still not quite sure what to think of it. I met my girlfriend, 22, online 2 years ago. We live 4 hours apart and haven't met at the time. We had been talking for a couple weeks at this point, and I hadn't mentioned my uncle to them. He had been a huge part of my life, and he stepped in as a father figure for me before I had to move far away from him at 9 years old. When I was in my teens, my uncle unfortunately passed away. His death had greatly affected me, and I'll be honest, I'm still not over it. I never told my girlfriend exactly how he died. I just let them know he had passed away and that I missed him and have some regrets that I didn't contact him more. My girlfriend had never met my uncle as they'd never been in the same state, and I had never even shown my girlfriend a picture of him as well. Well, one really nice day I decided to walk to work. While I was walking, I was speaking with my girlfriend over the phone. When it seemed a bit out of nowhere, my girlfriend asked me what my uncle looked like. I was a bit perplexed, but described my uncle to my girlfriend, who oddly enough was giving me details of what he looked like before I could even get those details out. My uncle and I did not look alike at all. Then the really odd question was asked. They asked if I would be willing to share how my uncle died. I agreed to share the story with them, as it's a bit tragic and upsetting. I won't go over all the details here, as it's very personal. I apologize, but I don't want to put his death on the internet. He had an accident though, and that was truly heart-wrenching. As I told my girlfriend the story, they began giving me details on everything that happened. I was shocked and a little unsettled. My girlfriend was able to practically tell me how my uncle died and details about where he was when it happened. I didn't know what to say, but my girlfriend then told me I had a dream and had seen this all happen. I'm not sure how that happened. I do know that my uncle sometimes appears in dreams and checks up with us. My mom had told me he appeared in her dream and told her she needed to wake up so she was ready to take me to school in the morning before it was too late. He's appeared in my dreams as well with his iconic laugh and checking up on me. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure if he shared that information with my girlfriend and why his death, if he did, or if it was beyond that. It's still something I think about 2 years later with my girlfriend. I ran in a panic when my neighbor's son had told me that someone had fallen into the old town well. My fear only grew as I was pushed into the dark, damp hole, falling to my death and seeing the rotting remains of my predecessors. Weird Noises in the Woods by Jhbeanco. When I was in high school, about 15 years ago, a group of friends and I were hanging out at our friend Dale's house. For some backstory, we live way out in the country, also technically part of the Appalachia, and the kind of middle of nowhere where the nearest neighbors are a few miles up the road. Dale happened to have a cave near his property that we like to explore and be dumb teenagers in. To get to the cave, you have to walk roughly a mile through dense forest and cross a big field. We had yet to find the end of the cave system despite exploring for hours at a time multiple times. One day, we had spent the better part of the afternoon exploring the caves and it had gotten dark by the time we emerged. We already had flashlights, so it was no big deal. My memory's a little fuzzy on the exact details, but for some reason our friend Sam decided to go back to the house a little earlier. I want to say we had ordered pizza or something and he went to meet the driver. The rest of us started making our way back through the woods to Dale's house when we started hearing voices in the woods. We were asking each other if we heard that and where it was coming from, but we each had a different direction of where we thought it was coming from. It was a childlike voice, and it sounded like it was talking or whispering, but you couldn't make out what was being said. At this point, we thought it was one of our friends messing with us, and we started to talk back to it. It sounded like child giggling, and then the flashlight started to flicker and die. We had one dim light left to get the rest of the way back. We were all thoroughly freaked out, prank or not, and hightailed it back to the house, adrenaline pumping. We all got to the house and shut the door, and I felt a sense of safety for a split second before the crucifix on the wall literally came off the wall and broke on the floor. It literally seemed like something out of a bad horror movie. But we all watched it legit come off the wall and crash to the ground for no apparent reason. Before that moment, I hadn't been convinced it wasn't our friend Sam that was messing with us, even though he really wasn't the type. We all started word vomiting on Sam, trying to explain what had just happened and question if it had something to do with it, but he generally seemed freaked out and confused. He actually said that on his way back to the house earlier, he kept hearing weird things and seeing lights in the woods, and he thought it was us trying to play a prank on him. I don't know what it was. Maybe our friend is a great actor, but I honestly don't think it was a prank. The feeling I got in the woods, like every hair was standing on end, goosebumps on my goosebumps, and every fiber of my being screaming to run. I've never felt like that again, and I never want to. I'll finally be free of my debt, I assured myself as I kicked out the stool beneath me. Next thing I knew, I was in the middle of what I recognized as a summoning circle, and clearly saw the IRS crest on the far wall. Unexplainable Incident That Is Burned Into My Brain by Chris410001. Just a quick backstory. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and anyone who's ever lived there knows it's very busy and noisy all day. There are riptata buses, traffic, businesses everywhere, but at night it gets very quiet and very eerie sometimes. This story is about an incident that happened to me when I was 15 and got my first job at McDonald's. This gives me chills every time I think about it. I was 15 and just got hired at McDonald's down the street from where I live. It was perfect because I could get to and from work without worrying about getting a ride from my parents. While working there, I met some kids my age and became close with them. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest of kids. They were very rebellious. They would clown around at work, act disrespectful to customers, typical 90s punks. I slowly started becoming like them. I began disrespecting my parents, which totally was not like me. But I was always that person with not many friends, so I wanted to fit in. Side note, I was a very sheltered person growing up and didn't really get around much because my parents were very overprotective of me. One night around 10 p.m., I finished watching Monday's Night Raw and went downstairs to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and heard my dad's footsteps. He wore these slippers that tapped loudly on the tile floor. "Chris, I asked you all day to take out the trash. They're coming tomorrow, so do it now." Now, normally I would have taken it out the first time he asked, but now that I was getting older and becoming a smartass, I didn't think it should be my responsibility anymore. "I work now and go to school. You take it out," I replied. My dad's eyes got wide as I had never spoken to him like this before. He leaned in and said softly, "As long as you live here, you will help out. Now take out the trash or leave." I called his bluff, and rather than just simply taking the trash out, I rebelled like a dumb teen that I was. "Fine, I'll leave if you're going to kick me out over that. Don't bother looking for me. I'm done living in this stupid house," I said as I opened the door and slammed it. I walked towards McDonald's to see if any of my friends were there, and they weren't. Just the maintenance guy finishing up the cleaning. Of course, of all nights it was raining, so I had to find somewhere to go to stay dry. There was a bridge with an overpass a little ways down the street, so I started walking towards it. The whole time I'm regretting what I did and wish I just took out the damn trash. I finished getting to the bridge and I climbed up the hill to the little section in the corner to stay out of view. I remember in school learning to go here in the case of a tornado, so I knew it was safe. I patiently and stubbornly waited, assuming that my parents would call the cops, which, in my mind, would show me that they cared. An hour goes by. Nothing. No sirens. No cars were even on the road. It was getting pretty cold, but I promised myself I wouldn't give in. I crossed my arms over my legs and fell asleep. I woke up violently from a semi wailing on his horn over the overpass. I looked all around confused. How long was I out for? I looked towards McDonald's and saw an old man in a gray suit sitting at the bus stop. It was weird. He was sitting still facing forward. I assumed it must be 5 a.m. since he was waiting for the bus. I stood up, very upset that my parents never even tried to find me, and began walking to the bus stop. Now, I'm a very outgoing person, and I trust my gut. As I walked closer to the old guy, I didn't get any negative vibes as I approached him. He slowly turned his head and looked at me and smiled. Not a creepy or uncomfortable smile, a general peaceful smile. I smiled back and decided instead of going home, maybe I can vent to this guy and get some advice. I asked if he minded if I sat down. He smiled again and gestured towards a seat.
Is everything okay?
He said with a concern. Yeah, I just ran away from home. My parents don't respect me anymore and how much I do all day, I said. I began telling him the story, and I noticed as the time went by, he was becoming more and more anxious, and his smile began turning into a frown. He began to start breathing loud and cut me off dead sentence and said,
"You need to go home now,"
with a stern voice. I was confused. I figured maybe his bus was coming soon and he wanted to say that before he left. I looked down in frustration because that's not what I wanted to hear. Suddenly, I felt a strong grip on my arm. He grabbed me and looked me dead in my eyes. His eyes were terrifying at this point. Bloodshot and wide, and I was shaking in fear, totally torn off guard by his complete switch in his persona. He was literally shaking like he was afraid of something. He kept looking down the street and then back into my eyes.
"You need to go home now,"
he screamed at me. At this point, this guy was starting to scare me, so I stood up and nodded, and he let go of my arm. Nervously, I started walking back to my house. I figured my mom was already up making coffee, so my plan of sneaking back in the house and hiding in the basement was not going to happen. Just to see if she'd be up, I looked at my watch. It was 1:30 a.m. My heart stopped and my throat became dry. Why was that man at the bus stop at 1:30 a.m. when the buses aren't even running? I turned back towards him to look at him. He was gone. Now I'm scared, confused, and I needed to get home. I used my spare key to get into the house. I opened the door quietly, and everyone was asleep. I slowly opened the basement door and made my way downstairs to the storage area in the back. I buried myself under bags of clothes so they wouldn't find me. Figured I could get some sleep. The image of that guy kept popping in my head, and I was so freaked out. It just made no sense. Just then I heard loud sirens passing by, and not just one. Multiple bursts of sirens coming every 10 seconds or so. I smiled thinking I won. My parents had called the police to look for me. My plan worked. And now I'll make them worry until morning and regret kicking me out. I made myself a little bed and covered myself up to stay hidden and fall asleep. I woke up to hear my mother sobbing upstairs. I looked outside the little bedroom window and saw daylight, so I figured I'd go upstairs and get my apology. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the dining room table with her head in her arms. She immediately looked up at me and gasped. She stood up and ran over to me and hugged me so tightly. "I thought you were dead," she muffled into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her confused.
"Why would you think that?"
I asked. What she said next sent chills throughout my entire body. The night before, around 1:40 a.m., a drunk driver crashed into the bus stop in front of the McDonald's and was completely destroyed. I started breathing heavy and realized the man saved my life. If he didn't tell me to leave when he did, I would have been sitting there and would have been killed. So many emotions were running through me, I didn't know how to handle it, so I just hugged my mother and immediately began to cry. I apologized and realized that I missed the old me. I almost got myself killed for my own stubborn stupidity. I dropped those friends and got into a new crowd at school, and from that point on, anytime the trash was full, I just took it out. I don't know who or what that was at the bus stop, but thank you for saving my life. I gasped for air, having finished yelling a long string of random, nonsensical words into the wooden canyon below as quickly as I could. I carefully checked each word that echoed carried back to me against the sequence I had written on my notepad, remarking to myself that it almost got them all right this time. Creature in the Woods by Normieamericana. So please bear with me while I explain this. I have a feeling it will be a little long, but the context here is important. So this happened about 4 years ago. I used to live in a very rural part of North Carolina, in the trad/foothills area. I was 17 at the time. My house was in the woods about a football's field length away from the road, which wasn't a major one, just a back road. We did have neighbors on one side, and they were pretty close, separated by maybe 10 yards and some trees, but on the other side there was a few acres between us and the nearest house. Behind our house was acres and acres of field and woods. There was also a pond down there as well. It's important later. Now to the encounter. So we had a dog at the time, and he had a lot we put him in at night to sleep in. It was nestled in the very edge of the woods, about 100 feet from our house, and it was about 7 to 9 at night, and it was winter, probably January to February. Don't remember exactly, but I do know the holidays were over. I was taking our dog out to the lot. I had his metal food bowl in hand and a phone in the other. I got about halfway to his lot and felt weird. I did freak myself out taking him out sometimes, so this wasn't particularly extraordinary. So I shined my flashlight on the edge of the woods near his lot, where it slopes down a little and was further into the woods. When I did this, I saw 2 glowing white eyes looking back at me. They were about 3 to 3.5 feet off the ground. My mind deducted it couldn't be a squirrel or a small animal, so I immediately yelled for our dog, dropped his food bowl, which made an extremely loud racket, metal on concrete, and ran in. I came in freaked out saying I saw something in the woods and I was not going back out. My mom said I was being dramatic and that it was a deer and she'd go with me. I felt very confident after the racket I made, whatever it was would have left, and so I went with her to take him back out. We walked out and I shined my light where the eyes were, and the eyes were still there, just as bright and staring right at us. My mom got freaked out and we ran inside again. She came in and told my stepdad I was right and was freaked out, saying there was a man sitting down there in the woods. My stepdad then went out there with a real flashlight and a gun and we followed. He shined it back in the spot and there the eyes were. He yelled, "Hey," real loud. This is when I got the best look at it. The eyes were 100% about 3 to 3.5 feet off the ground. It stared right at us and then walked sideways, not breaking eye contact, very fluid, and then went off into the woods. We never heard a sound, no leaves breaking, no twigs snapping, nothing. Never saw anything like it since, and every time I took my dog out, I never saw anything like that again, despite checking every time. Some follow-up stuff to this. Before anyone asks, I don't know how my dog was acting. At the time, I was too scared to pay attention to it. I do know he would sometimes eat possums and skunks that fall into his lot, and would bark at other stuff like deer and foxes. The whole encounter, he was silent and ran inside with us and stayed close with us. The land behind the house, I'm almost certain, is native land. Way behind the house, up on the hill overlooking the pond, are stones in the ground, about 2 to 3 with markings on them. With certainty I can say the inscriptions are old and are definitely a form of writing. They're very weathered, not fresh at all, and precisely drawn lines with parallels and equal spacing between markings. We've also found arrowheads in the area. We jokingly call it the Indian burial ground, but from my research, natives in North Carolina rarely practice burial like this with headstones. So I'm not sure what it is, but I'm pretty certain it is native, if not older. The pond. I always got a weird vibe down by the pond fishing, always. It was a natural pond/spring, but my stepdad turned into a larger pond when he had cows and stocked it with more fish. There's a large slope you have to walk down surrounded by baby pine trees on each side. There's a small circle area right before you go down the hill to the pond, and in the clearing we used to find a lot of bones. I mean, a lot. There'd be about 3 to 4 piles of fish and snake bones neatly in a pile, normally all missing the head part. This pond is not close to where I had the encounter. It's close to the other side of the property, but still on our property. Crow's Head. Back in this area where I got weird vibes, my stepdad had an old fence post separating his land from the neighbors. It's an overgrown field/pasture on one side and straight up woods on the other. The neighbor did come back here sometimes, but normally just to ride ATVs. Anyways, one day in the summer I went back there with friends, and in the very back line of the property was a crow's head stuck on the fence post. It was super freaky, and we dipped. Now, I've seen this before at my grandpa's house. That time when I saw it, it was on a fence post around his garden, and he told me you do that if crows are eating your garden, they'll stay away. However, when I saw it at a house, there had never been a garden anywhere near that fence post or close to that area at all. I'm posting this story mainly because I'm curious what you guys think it is. I can assure you this creature wasn't any small critter like a squirrel or a raccoon or even a deer. I've debunked these myself because the eyes were too big and too high to belong to any small critters, and a deer would have 100% have run away after all the racket and noise we made, and my stepdad yelling. We saw deer routinely, and they're very skittish as their prey animals. The only animal I think it could be would be a black bear, a mountain lion, or a bobcat. And I lean more towards a feline because it moved extremely fluidly and smooth. The issue with this is mountain lions aren't found in North Carolina, and bobcats are native but would be too small to fit the height of the eyes. A black bear is possible, but also very, very rare to find in the area I lived in. You find them mostly in the mountains. Also, I would think a black bear would have made more noise like grunting and moved not so fluidly. It's a small community and everyone knows everyone pretty much, and everyone in the area hunts, and there's a lot of game trails out there. Usually when someone spots something out of the ordinary, bear, bobcat, big buck, it's the talk of the town, but no one mentioned seeing something weird in the area at the time. Curious what you guys have to say about the encounter. I add the info about the native land, the crow head, and the pond in case these are signs of cryptids, and could be useful in identifying it as it's paranormal. It could be completely coincidental and not related, but just thought it could be potentially important. Thanks so much for listening this far, and I look forward to feedback. My black cat always runs around the house at night, and all I can usually make out is his yellow eyes. My heart sunk when I was carrying him around the kitchen, and the same yellow eyes were glaring at me from around the corner. Haunting at the Barn by boredcons. Yesterday night, me, my boyfriend, and our friends were playing hide-and-go-seek on their property, big western horse property in western Oregon. We agreed on having no lights on the barn/area, so we couldn't see anything. Anyway, me and my boyfriend were searching. I was in the barn and he was waiting outside where he could see the entrance. While I was in there, I heard footsteps and whispers clear as day. So of course I thought they were in there and coming my way. I hid to get them when they walked past me. When no one came for several minutes, I got out of the barn, paired up with my boyfriend again, and continued searching. We went back to the barn after a while and were hiding up in an alley when we heard the barn door to the training bar wing open. footsteps coming towards us, and my boyfriend said he heard our one friend, Hope, whisper our other friend's, Randy's, name. Not much later, I heard Randy clearly whisper Hope and footsteps coming from the alley up to the round pen, so I told my boyfriend to block the other alley leading up to it while I sneaked there so we can finally get them. But no. We had a few other whispering encounters in the barn during our little game, and when we called them on the phone outside the barn to finally give up, they came to meet us, saying they weren't in the barn till like the last 5 minutes of the game. We told them about our encounters, and Hope, the rancher's daughter, told us that their clients have heard similar stuff. This morning, her mom asked how it went, so we told her. We got to know a lot more about this barn while talking to her about it. Before they bought the property, there was only a couple and their few horses. The other stalls and stuff weren't used at all. And that guy died while working on something in the area. They've had orbs, whispering, footsteps, cold spots, shadow figures peeking around corners and standing just in the corner of your eye. Energies in the cow's pen and something in the corner of the area that would spook even the most broke horse. The rancher's wife got sick of the latter since it would spook her daughter's horse, and one day she got really pissed, so she took a whip, went to the corner, whipped the area and the wall and told whatever it was in there to get the fuck out. When she put the whip over her shoulder, something tugged on it twice, and you bet she noped out of there. So, what do you all think of that? Mr. Smith, the biology teacher, found virtual teaching very tough to get to know his students. How else would he know which student would be the perfect to add to his collection of skeletons to teach anatomy with? Hunting Report: Ancient Giant Presence in Papua New Guinea by John-Pepe. Hello everyone. Hello Reddit. Over the festive season, my daughter persuaded me to post one of my stories from my early years on your platform. To be completely frank with you, some of the questions I'm about to raise here are still bothering me to this day. So, anyway. So the story is about hunting. At the time, I was 17 and living in Papua New Guinea, a large archipelago in the southern western Pacific Ocean. My parents were French, but I was born in Papua New Guinea and had spent my entire childhood surrounded by native Papuans. I considered them my brothers, and they considered me one of theirs. One of my friends was a boy my age called Cam. He lived in my neighborhood, and we went to the same class for a long time, so we were very close. I say were because we haven't seen each other for a long time. He and I shared a passion for hunting and fishing. We spent our weekends in the lush forest woods behind my house, chasing small prey and birds. I've amassed an enormous number of memories and hunting stories, and experienced as many laughed-out-loud moments as painful and frightening ones. We also gather a lot of experience and equipment. During these hunting trips, the peak of excitement, the real trophy, was the big prey, and in particular the deers. But they were rare in the small woods that bordered our neighborhood, and we barely ever saw any. To find one, you really had to go deep into the jungle. So, during the holiday seasons, we asked Cam's big brother to give us a lift in his 4x4. And he accompanied us on our expedition into the prehistoric flora and fauna. This time, Cam's older brother had guided us to a hunting area I'd never been to before. We arrived very early in the morning, armed and equipped ourselves, and set off into the jungle in silence. To describe the atmosphere, the inside of the jungle is like a burning oven. We were forced to wear nothing but our underwear because it was so hot. The air was also extremely humid, with drops constantly falling from the trees even though it wasn't raining, and the ground was made of slimy, sticky mud. Not to mention all the insects and vegetation that constantly irritate our skin. Hell on earth, but it was really fun. We also could hear the monkeys calling and the birds singing through the forest. There was never a moment of silence. We concentrated on listening to the animals' footsteps, following their tracks in the mud, picking up any dung we came across, and vigilantly observing our surroundings. That day, we wanted to go deeper into the jungle. To my surprise, my two friends took an abnormally long detour that made no sense to me, as we were wasting time and energy when the primary forest was practically impracticable. But I thought they knew the area better than I did, and that the landscape I was seeing was magnificent, so I didn't say anything. After 4 or 5 hours of walking, we came to a watering hole, which looked like a heavenly little swamp. It was a good sign, so we stopped, had a drink, then hid, rifles in hand. After 40 minutes of silence, perhaps an hour, a pair of deer appeared near the watering hole. Feeling the excitement and adrenaline pumping, I slowed my heart rate and took aim at the buck. Then the three of us fired in chorus. It made a terrifying bang, a triple rifle shot that instantly struck down the prey. All the animals in the vicinity fled and all the local birds flew away. I'm not an animal sadist, and violence isn't my favorite thing about hunting, but I have to admit that seeing the deer fall into our hands gave us all great joy. Then we tied up the animal's legs to carry it to the 4x4, but instead of taking the most direct way and clipping through the area we avoided at the inbound, Cam headed off in the direction of the detour. I argued that there was no point and we were wasting our time. Then Cam responded with a bewildered answer. He said, "Our traditions forbid us to pass through these lands because it was here that our ancestors killed the last giant." His tone was serious and solemn, and his eyes betrayed neither lies nor humor. I didn't try to argue any further, and we headed back to the 4x4 via the diversions. At the time, I was really surprised by the mystical response, but then I was able to relate it to another story I heard from another native, Vili, the sister of a friend of mine. As part of her job, she had to terraform a parcel of land that was in a forest in order to build houses. When she and her team were excavating the ground to build the foundations, they made an outstanding discovery. 4 human skeletons, the largest over 5 meters tall. Naturally, they called in some paleoanthropologist consultants from France. Scientists and soldiers arrived in a hurry the next day. They strictly forbid access to the area to anyone who wanted to go near it. A few days later, the scientists left, taking the bones with them, and assuring Vela and the other witnesses that the incident had never happened. That's all I have to say. I haven't managed to get to the bottom of this mystery, which the Islanders find hard to talk about. I've done some research into them, and some legends claim that these giants were the result of crossbreeding between humans and extraterrestrial race, known as the Nordics, the tall blondes, or the Ilithiums of the Bible. Do what you like with this information. Also, I've never seen any giants myself, but the people around me believe in their existence very hard, and the legends circulate. Kill one child of your choice, or both will die, I say to the mother as I have every other victim, awaiting the delight her despair will bring me. My blood went cold as she shot the daughter without a second thought. Our Experience with Automatic Writing by Pokemon Trainer 29. My husband and I have been watching a lot of Sam and Kobe lately and are absolutely addicted. We've also been watching Selena Spooky Boo and Chris. If you like ghost hunting shows, I highly recommend both YouTube channels. Of all the methods they use to contact spirits, we are both very interested in the automatic writing that Selena likes to use a lot. My husband tends to be very in tune with the spiritual side and has had success with meditation in the past, so the other night we decided to give it a try. First, some background info. I, 30 male, met my husband, 29 male, back in 2012. In 2013, my husband's uncle passed away by unaliving himself, and we, along with my future in-laws, moved into the house where his uncle lived with his parents, who would be my husband's grandparents. From 2013 to 2016, both of these grandparents and also his great-grandmother would also pass away. Needless to say, there were plenty of people that could possibly come through for my husband, so he found a white noise playlist on Spotify, blindfolded himself, and we started. I said what everyone says at first. Is there anyone here that would like to speak with my husband? At first, there was nothing, but eventually the pen started to move and the first word appeared, rough but distinctive. Box. I honestly wasn't expecting a word to appear right away. I should point out that my husband has a very, very neat handwriting and almost exclusively writes in cursive, but this word was very shaky and jagged. I said the word out loud and waited. Eventually, my husband wrote a second word, under. Just under the word box, but in cursive this time. I was a little spooked that this could actually be making sense, so I said nothing and let him continue. He started writing a third word, this time almost on the edge of the paper away from the first two words. But it was again very clear, bed. Box, under, bed. There's no way this is actually working, I thought to myself. But I went ahead and asked hesitantly, what's in the box? Almost instantly, his hand went to the middle of the paper and very quickly wrote, me. Instantly freaked out, I tapped my husband's shoulder to take him out of the session. He asked why I took him out so quickly. It had been maybe 2 minutes, and I showed him what he wrote. He sat and stared at the words for a minute, then let out a small gasp. One of all the people who had recently lived in the house and passed away, there was still one who had not been laid to rest. His grandfather's ashes were in a box downstairs in his parents' closet. One of his latest wishes was to be buried here on the property he helped nurture for so many years rather than be buried in a cemetery. But my husband's parents just hadn't gone around to it. The closet is almost directly under where one of the beds would have been when he was alive, and now a futon sits there that my husband frequently naps on. With this information, my husband asked if he could try again. I was a little apprehensive, but said yes, and he went under again. This time I waited before I said anything, just to see what would happen. After a few seconds, he began writing. I looked over his shoulder and saw the word tree. He started drawing what I thought looked like a cloud, but he stopped with just the top of it. He then drew 2 lines coming from the cloud-like object. I quickly realized I was looking at a drawing of what he had just wrote, a tree. After another few seconds, he started to write another word. I looked down and almost couldn't believe what he wrote next, buried, followed by intense underlining the tree drawing. He wanted to be buried by a tree. Now I know what some of you might say, that my husband had a preconceived notion of who he was talking to, and may even fake what he was writing. After we were done, my husband assured me that he had next to no idea what he actually was writing. We've been together for over 10 years, so he has no reasons to lie about something like this. Believe what you want to believe, but for those who do believe, there's more. He continued, and the next words he wrote were tree and me again. He then began drawing the cloud-shaped object again, which I eventually recognized as the top of a tree, but this time there was no tree trunk, just leaves, and there was some dot-like objects after, almost like an eclipse. Then suddenly he wrote the word "don't" in all caps. At this point, I hadn't really said much, but I was convinced about the word "don't." So I decided to ask if this was indeed grandfather's name. My husband wrote two of the same words again, tree and berry. The word berry overlapped the word "don't," so I turned the page for him. The last bit is honestly a little hazy to me, but the first thing he did on the new page was draw some type of jagged symbol. We still don't quite know what it is or what it means, but after that he wrote the word yes. The only yes or no question I had asked was if this really was his grandfather. He then wrote the word closet, which would make sense because his ashes were in a closet, and then the word stairs. As I was trying to figure out what stairs had to do with anything, my husband wrote the final word, please. With that, I decided to go ahead and tap on my husband's shoulder and bring him out of the session. We then talked about everything that had happened. His grandfather absolutely loved everything about nature, flowers, and animals. So it made sense that we'd ask to be buried outside after spending the last 8 or so years in a closet. Oddly enough, at one point my in-laws had even talked about burying one of those trees that you plant with loved ones' ashes, so the tree part made a lot of sense too. Also, his grandfather used to tell my husband when he was a kid that he wanted to be buried in his garden. The tree with no trunk and then the word "don't" after symbolized to us that he didn't want to be buried in his garden, but rather near or as a tree instead. We still don't know what the stairs was about, but the weird symbol thing almost looked like a flight of stairs. I'll post a picture in the comments if I can, but let me know what you guys think. I promise it's 100% real and we're still talking about it days later. We've made plans to make sure we lay him to rest this coming spring. And I'm going to put on screen right now for you guys all 3 pictures that he posted. We sat in our car at a hill overlooking the city like we were teenagers again, and she gave me the saddest smile as she squeezed my hand. She watched as the bombs went off and all of our friends and family, everything important in our lives incinerated in a nuclear glow, and she turned to me then as a shockwave roared towards us. I love you. Spirits, Ghosts, Poltergeists, Apparitions, etc. By Potential Length 4133. Hey everyone. I thought I'd give a little information about what the paranormal is according to Islamic perspective, and hopefully others, when they experience any paranormal event, that they know what to expect and how to repel them. Here's what I can tell you based on our perspective as Muslims. When we talk about the afterlife, we're referring to people's spirits in their graves and can communicate with the living, but through certain ways such as dreams. However, we believe that the deceased can't in no way or form harm or benefit to anyone, basically meaning they have no power whatsoever to do anything. What you're talking about, however, demons, spirits, and whatnot are what we call jinn. What are the jinn? The jinn are living sentient beings who, like humans, have free will, do all sorts of things, inhabit communities, get married, procreate, you name it. However, there are certain things that they have and we don't, such as moving at incredible speeds, possessions, shape-shifting to living creatures, and imitating their voice, behavior, and so on. And the ability to not be seen by humanity unless they want to be seen by them, either as shadow people, animals, humans, you name it. However, you might ask, how can sometimes they, the jinn, say things that you might know and no one else knows? Well, according to our scriptures, a Quran, Arabic for companion, which is a jinn who follows you wherever you go, which is also the reason why sometimes mediums and fortune tellers can tell you things about yourself since they communicate with a Quran. That Quran usually is a jinn who either junks about you and gives them your information. The jinn vary from generally nice jinn who wish you no harm and just want to go about their usual day. Others are pranksters that like scaring people just for the fun of it. Others are downright evil and wish nothing but harm to you, whether by leading you astray or trying to literally hurt you. And these are the ones that we call devils. Shaitan, and that includes Satan. In Islam, we believe he's a jinn too and not a fallen angel. Not to mention that there are weak jinn and there are really powerful jinn. Usually the powerful variations of them are called ifrits, and they have the power to move heavy things with little effort. So we believe that the jinn also have different beliefs. There are Muslim jinns and non-Muslim jinns and so on. And the word of the Quran can be effective too, especially when it comes to hauntings and such. If they're Muslim, they can enjoin the Quran and can even read it with you. Usually when the name of Allah is invoked by reciting the Quran, the evil ones can get hurt by it and can be repelled by the word of the Quran. And it's an important factor that everyone needs to know. The jinn can try and scare you. However, once they know that no matter what they do can't scare you, they eventually give up and they stop scaring you because it's not fun, so they will eventually stop. However, if the jinn is literally trying to hurt you, such as random scratches, things falling on you without any reasonable explanation, some kind of medical condition that can't be explained, and by that, when they check on you and find that there is nothing wrong with you clinically, which are usually signs of possession, then the only way for that jinn to leave you is by having a Muslim imam or a cleric to read the Quran to you. So, there were a few things I wanted to share for people to understand the paranormal from an Islamic point of view. I hope you enjoyed this humble post and have learned something interesting. Thanks. I tried to force my way off the plane as it was now 5 hours late, but was tackled to the ground by the air marshal and then heavily sedated to keep me docile. I could feel my body begin to change while gazing out the window at the full moon, and felt no sympathy knowing that I was about to rip apart everyone else on board. The Man in the Hat, Shadow People Being Something Else, by RaffyHighStrangeness. Hi everyone, I'm sharing another story with the Reddit community. This one still makes me think and is one of my more persistent experiences that I've had. Please let me know what you all think. The Man in the Hat. This is one of my earliest memories. If I had been alone when it happened, I would have not been confident enough to share it. This occurred when I was a young boy. My older brother was with me. We lived in Mexico City. We were born there. This event happened sometime after the 8.0 magnitude earthquake of 1985. This violent earthquake led to the deaths of over 5,000 people and several $7 billion worth of damage. This earthquake, its intensity and wild destruction is my earliest memory. At the time, we lived in an apartment building several stories up. The structure was just your run-of-the-mill housing unit commonly constructed out of concrete, brick, and wood. I recall how, upon entering the unit, the dining area would be immediately to your right, the kitchen to the left. If you head further inwards, there was a trellis where my mom kept her plants and my dad kept his dog. Beyond this area, the kids' room would be to your left, my parents' room to the right. In between these two rooms was a living room with several windows looking out onto the street. Our unit was located at the corner of the building. This happened sometime around noon. My brother and I were playing in the living room with our toy cars on the windowsill. Our mom had just come from watering her plants and had gone into her room. My dad was out. I recall looking onto the street, seeing several cars and people moving about. If I remember correctly, we were trying to recreate as accurately as possible the goings-on of the world below with our toys. We were situated near the corner of the window, my brother to my right, closest to the wall, when something strange caught my attention. A set of sturdy, unusually pale hands with long, dirty, claw-like nails were piercing the brick exterior of the building. Then a circular, flat, soot-covered black object came into view. This object appeared to be swaying from side to side with each climb. The flattened object slowly became elongated, tall, fanning out at the base, a hat. Gradually, and much to my confusion, I began to make out the features of a man, except that it didn't look like any man I had ever seen. Paled face, long hair, with intense dark eyes. His face is the kind of thing you never forget. I bumped my brother with my elbow, his attention still diverted by the toy cars in his hand. His view partly obstructed by the wall. "Look," I remember saying to him. My brother looked up, his toy still in hand, and a silence overtook the both of us. Expressionless, his gaze somewhere far away, the man stopped his ascent, then turned and looked directly at us. Still holding onto the facade of the building, his plaited face suddenly turned into a hollow grimace of a smile. His teeth were sharp, fanged with a yellowish hue. His eyes glowed with an intensity that seemed out of place for something that was already out of place. Suddenly the man brought one of his hands to his still outstretched smile, and with it signaling us to shh. Frozen in place, we stood there and watched him resume his climb. As he scaled the building, we noticed just how tall he was. He was immense, taller than most people you encounter on any given day in this city. We also saw that he wore what looked like a 3 or 4-piece black suit, and a long coat. Quite distinctively, it was hard to ignore that he looked to be like he was covered in smoke. Despite his warning, we ran and excitedly tried to get our mom to come with us to see the smoke-covered man. She hurried alongside us, opening the window and looking out and up. If his goal was to climb to the top of the building, who the hell knew what he was doing there in the first place? He still had several stories to go, yet no one was there. She called out to the street and shouted if anyone had seen anything. No were the only answers from below. There was no immediate recall of what occurred following this event, only that life felt a bit strange, as if the person was something that we weren't meant to see. It was like being a child and thinking that you would be in trouble if you snuck up on Santa Christmas morning when you should be asleep, except that there had been an air of danger that my younger self felt was better left alone. Several years later, we moved to another apartment in the city before eventually making it out to the United States, where a better life awaited us. Sometime around 1997, we were all having dinner at our new house. We were still keeping the dinner hours we had been accompanied to in Mexico. So around 9 p.m., we all gathered at the table. We were having a pretty good time, smiling and carrying on, when my older brother abruptly stopped laughing halfway through a joke. I thought he was choking, so I turned to look at him. He was ghostly pale, his eyes and mouth wide open. He lifts his hand and points directly to the living room beyond where the dining area and kitchen are. We all turned, now staring into the dimly lit darkness of the living room. I asked him what's wrong. He says, "There's a really tall person standing there looking at us." "What does he look like?" I asked. His voice, quieter than usual, shakingly replied, "He's wearing a tall hat and a really long coat." I remember feeling like time stopped, immediately thinking of the man we had seen several years before scaling the side of the building we used to live in. It couldn't possibly be the same person. "What does his face look like?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "It's all black, like a shadow." Thank you to everyone listening and reading. Again, please let me know what you think. It wasn't until I seriously started browsing forums in the late 2000s that I began to realize that these kind of entities may be more common than I thought. Still, as the series goes on, which you can find at my Substack, I'll share what I really think may be going on here. I'll have that link in the description box / show notes for you guys. Every time I kill a priest, I tell them the same thing. "Ask God to heal my daughter, or I'll keep sending messengers." Emotional Attachment by Plain Bobcat 4805. This happened to me when I was about 13. I was with my native side of the family and learning about the spiritual paths of the family, when I felt this major gut feeling. We were outside on the back patio, and it was getting pretty dark as we were out there for a while. I could feel something standing on the other side of the fence behind where I was sitting. The feeling got worse to the point I started feeling nauseous. Out of nowhere, generally within a split second, I started sobbing, like scream crying. I've always pictured the spirit as a woman. It felt like a woman's pain and yearning. I don't know why. It just always been what was shown to me. I was a little on edge beforehand, but not nearly to the point of bursting out in painful emotion like that, especially in front of people with no trigger. I had no idea what was happening. They brought me inside. I was with my 34 or so year old cousin and gave me one of my late aunt's old stuffed animals. The second I held it, I stopped. I've always had a very strong connection to her, and I hadn't even known it was hers until afterwards. When they gave it to me, I even thought, really, a stuffed animal? I've always been sensitive to energy, especially as a child, but that's the most that's ever attached to me, by far. They, my cousin, had talked about it with me, and they had told me they felt it outside the fence too, before I even told them I felt something there. They just didn't want to scare me. Later, they told me they had a salt ring around the property, which would make sense as to why I felt it directly on the other side of the fence rather than any closer. They had explained to me that empaths are like a bright light shining in a dark space. It draws things to you, and when a spirit with that much hurt, that much emotion, and no way to express it in the physical realm, they can pass it on to you. I've never found anything to explain it, but I also know what I felt, and there were too many confirmations that it wasn't just in my head. The Ifrit cackled, vowing to kill all those who cared for me before the sun rose again. I woke to find my wife and kids eating breakfast downstairs, but my dog had stopped breathing. I already see too much, but this Shadow Man encounter felt insane. By SageHedgeHag. Since I was a kid, I've seen some really dark entities, but I often come back to the specific one that happened less than a year ago. I had first moved to Portland from Minneapolis in November of 2022, and this incident happened late winter/early spring of 2023. At the time, I was living with my aunt, and it was around 1 a.m. in the morning. Everyone was in bed, and I was in the living room playing the new Hogwarts Legacy. All lights turned off except for the cast of the TV when all of a sudden, I got a violent chill on my spine and every hair on my body stands straight up. I immediately break into a cold sweat and I imagine this is what prey feels like when something has locked on. My eyes immediately go towards the dark kitchen hallway and I see long dark fingers wrapping around the corner and my breath stops watching this happen in slow motion. I know what comes next and see a head pop around the corner shortly after I make out the hand. I'm staring into complete black face of darkness, and I know it's staring straight at me, but as soon as it looked around the corner, it went back not to be seen again. I'm shaking at this point, but I feel like it was looking for someone specific and not finding them. Like I wasn't who they were hoping to encounter? I don't know. Granted, at this time, I was living with people who unfortunately stay within stagnant negative energy, and I cleanse myself as much as possible and try not to engage in their constant BS. This isn't the first time I've seen shadow people, but this is the first time I looked one in the face, and I absolutely do not recommend. The worst part of the outbreak wasn't watching many of my relatives, my friends, or even my wife die. It was that the fungus didn't block the connection between my brain and my taste buds. We used to play a supernatural paper game that gave us answers. By Anonymoose. I studied in an Asian country. This is important as it has to do with the Asian culture or not. I'm not very sure anymore. Back in high school, we used to play this paper game where if you asked it a question answerable with yes, no, or question mark, it would oddly tell you the answer. Let me explain. It goes like this. Step 1. You cut out 3 small pieces of paper that you can write yes, no, and a question mark on. The question mark means that the thing, spirit, or entity you asked is not certain of the answer. You need to cut 6 pieces of tissue paper of equal size or bigger than the 3 pieces of paper. What is important is that the answer papers are covered. You now need to place the 3 rolled up papers between your fingers, 1 in each, starting from your forefinger and middle finger, kind of like when someone is holding a smoke, but placed closer to the palm if that makes sense. Do this for the other remaining 2 rolls until you reach the ring finger and the pinky finger. Step 4. Now place your palm to your chest where your heart is, palm facing down, and in your head ask your questions that can be answered by yes or no, while also chanting. Unfortunately, I can't remember the chant. You need to say it 3 times while you ask your question in your head. Step 5. After this, unravel the rolled paper and see the answer. You'll know this because the answer paper that used to be in the middle of the 3 layered rolls would be found in the innermost layer of the roll, meaning it would move magically to the inside of the roll. It would be the first thing you see when you unroll it. That is your answer. I remained fascinated by it and didn't question the hows or whys. I was more concerned with the answers I would get after asking whatever the thing answered me. and my classmates and best friend would be in their corner asking anything under the sun. I especially remember a classmate of mine having a breakdown because her 4-year relationship will not last according to the paper game. And yes, whatever answer you get comes true. I were jokingly asking out loud if our ever so strict teacher was not coming to class, knowing full well how impossible it can be, and got a yes answer. We laughed at it, saying, "This time around, you're so wrong." Only for our class president, who was attending a meeting among the student council and was not there to hear anything regarding the question that was asked among my friend group, that and our cell phones are confiscated at the start of class until we go home. Our teacher would place the phones inside a glass jar where we could see if anyone is calling us, so we can ask whoever the teacher is in our class for the key to open the jar. It's a whole thing. It only means that no one could have tipped off our class pres to, say, prank us. We asked all sort of questions and would get answers. Most would be small things, but some, like my classmate who is now in a better relationship, got their answer whether they liked it or not. And we even asked the paper if we were going to get into our chosen universities, and lo and behold, a few weeks in, we would get letters from said universities and would either get a no or yes as an answer, just like what the paper said. I got a yes and even graduate from that school. It bothers me looking back at it, and when I bring it up with my friends, they don't remember, but when I ask my cousin, who went to the same school but 3 years younger than me, remembers it. A friend from another section would tell me of his experience, much darker than I would like to know. He told me about a classmate they had who always kept to themselves and rarely interacted with them, and jokingly asked if that person was going to have a girlfriend. It gave him 2 answers, no and question mark. They did this a couple of times and kept getting the same answer, even if a different friend did it. Creeped out, they stopped the questioning and later on forgot about it. Life moved on. What's creepier? My uni is known for offering programs in the medical field, so it's only natural to have a hospital attached to it, as it started as a hospital. And it was just after I became a university student, the topic of what our common friends were up to came up. He then brought up the classmate of his and what he had been doing. Solemnly he said that he was in jail for killing his girlfriend and son. Specifically, he had someone kill her and the boy, and they pretend to be internet installers, and they end up using a hammer to end them. And he solemnly said maybe that's why we kept getting 2 answers from the damn paper game. What was more chilling was the mother and son were brought to the ER of my uni before they expired from their injuries. I was not there when they came in, and even if I had, our professors would have not allowed us to see them. I was so shocked that it made national news. It was that gruesome. I personally never knew the guy. Thank the heavens for that, and didn't even connect the dots about him being a batch mate for my old high school. But I guess the paper game did and foresaw what was going to happen to that poor woman and son. What do you think? Did you play the paper game that answers your questions? Do you know any games just like this? A quick add-on. The person who allowed me to read this story also sent me articles as well about this story, but they aren't in English, just to give you guys a heads up. Their links are in the description box / show notes. As usual, the office staff entered the room without waiting for the floor to dry as soon as the janitor finished mopping the floor. "Does anyone else smell gasoline?" one of them asked right before the janitor threw a lit matchstick into the room from outside. Shadow Man? By OdetteisDead. I've seen a few different things. Most commonly, I can just see a dog out the corner of my eyes, which are different breeds from the ones of which I own. The most vivid one was watching a shorter, stockier dog walk across my bedroom floor in front of my footboard. It was white with brown spots. At the time, we never owned a white dog. The house was built in 1926 for reference. This, however, was the first time seeing something like this. I was sitting in the living room doing some stuff on my laptop, when as I look up, since I saw something moving in my father's room, albeit he was taking a nap, I watched clear as day a tall man walk across one side of the room to the other. He had to be at least 7 feet tall. He had a cane, one more for the style rather than the physical needs. He wore a top hat and looked to be wearing a nice dress clothing, from what I can make out in the shapes. I had never seen anything like that. I got up and checked to see if anyone else was in the room, just to be sure I wasn't seeing things. No one else was in the room. It was only my father sleeping in his bed. The way the doors worked was they were old French doors. They were both open, displaying the room, which was originally intended to be the living room when it was built. The same room is also where I saw the full body of the dog walking on the floor down along the footboard. I feel as though that this room is the hotspot of everything I've encountered, though I have seen things going flying off shelves in my own. I've heard stories where a similar figure has been seen and some encounters have been dangerous, or he's been dangerous. Thoughts? Since she passed away, he only ever wished to see his daughter again. As her squealing corpse chewed through his jugular, the last 2 of the genie wishes suddenly felt like a threat. Strange Experience I Can't Get Out of My Mind by RDF69. I've had this paranormal experience that happened to me about 2 to 3 years ago. I've never been able to shake it out of my mind. I started thinking about it again today and wanted to get some insight on people who know a thing or two about the paranormal. So, now I'm here. I was at a PTO meeting at my old school. I was bored and the only other kid there was an older girl that I'm not really friends with. So I decided to leave the cafeteria and wander around the school. Once I reached the 2nd floor, I started walking down the hallway towards the library. Then I heard a voice, which sounded like a child's, coming from the library. It made a weird noise that went like... Really glad I was recording, so I captured that. I was a bit startled, but I was really curious as to what the noise could be. The library door was locked and the lights were off. No one was in there, and no one was even on the floor except for the janitor way down another hallway. I started to walk towards the library in curiosity. I then saw an all-white hand slap the window from the inside. Really mad my camera was on me, so I didn't get it on video. Does anyone have a clue what that thing in the library could have been? Side note, everyone used to say that the library was haunted. No one really saw anything, and you can't trust dumb and fooling around kids. But I did always have a weird feeling in that room and was always looking around in paranoia. Also, a little side note for me, the weird audio in the middle of this is the one that the writer is talking about. I did up the sound so it was easier for you guys to hear as well. I don't want to play hide and go seek with my little brother anymore. It's been 3 years today and I can't find him anywhere. My experiences with bumps in the night by Additional Help 2760. Hey y'all, I figured there would be a forum like this on Reddit. Glad I found it. I've had many experiences with orbs, ghosts, bumps, and interactions in my house. Here are the biggest. The first one is pretty cool in my opinion. Number 1. My wife is a childhood diabetic, and sometime at night her sugar levels will drop dangerously, which can put her into a coma. I'm a very light sleeper and have trouble sleeping in general, so one night at 2 a.m. I got up to watch TV, and as I walked past my wife, I looked at her and noticed 2 orbs around her head. One was bright yellow, and one was white/yellow. I looked, took a couple of more steps, and then went, "What the hell?" I backed up, and sure enough, the orbs were still around her head, so I went to check on my wife, and sure enough, she was profusely sweating, a sign of low sugar. We figured those orbs were her parents. Number 2. Another night I came back to bed and noticed an orb on my bed. I sat down and moved blankets around, lifting them up and stuff to see if it was a light trick, but the orbs just stayed there. I moved around, waved my hands, but the lights were never blocked. Then I heard a thump on the floor and noticed the orb was now at the base of our dresser, about the shoulder height of our dear cat Winston, who passed away in 2007. I still miss him so much. We have often felt him jump on the bed or jump off. Number 3. And again, I was up watching hockey at about 4 a.m. when I noticed a black triangle zip across the screen against the white ice. Hey, there's a bird in the stadium, I thought, so I rewound the game. It was PVR. But no bird. The next night, I just climbed into bed when I felt 2 tugs on my blanket right by my shoulder, but I ignored it. The next night, as I lay in bed, I felt a heavy weight sit on the edge of the bed beside me. It scared the crap out of me. After that, he did not return, but my wife has a friend who can interact with spirits, and she said it was someone named Kevin. Number 4. This one I hate. I have a fan that has a safety feature. If you touch the fan shroud, it will stop the fan so the kids cannot be hurt. Suddenly, every night for a month, at 3 a.m.-ish, the fan would stop. And when it stopped, it makes a loud electric sound, a buzzing. The fan never stops at any other time except then. I always felt like there was someone standing in the corner watching me each night, and this freaked me out, so I moved the fan to an empty room, and guess what? It doesn't stop. If it stopped at random times, it was on from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m., I would say electrical problem. But every night around 3 a.m. Bit strange. Number 5. This one just happened 2 nights ago. I was awake and laying in bed, and I could hear someone walking back and forth at the foot of the bed, and it was keeping me awake. Then I heard a tapping sound from our baseboard heater, then walking, then tapping. Well, this was too much, so I growled, "Will you fuck off? You're keeping me awake!" Right after I said this, there was a loud thump on the floor like I startled it, and the air in the room immediately became lighter. I have many more experiences, but these are the best. I guess I'm a bit tuned into the spirits. For number 3, I think I brought it in on myself. Knowing I'm a bit sensitive to spirits, I have been saying in my mind, if any spirits need help and you are a good spirit, I will try to help you. I guess Kevin needed help. A follow-up. Since I startled that spirit that night, I have had no experiences. The room has felt light. And this one goes with the creepy one. One night at bedtime, my wife and I had gotten to bed when we heard a hanger in our closet move. We both looked at each other. Then after the fan was turned off at 3 a.m.-ish, again, I sat up in bed, looked in the corner where the fan is, could sense someone/thing there, and said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave this house and never return." A dark shadow went out my bedroom window, right beside the fan, and triggered the security light that is over our bedroom window as soon as it did. But I do think he came back, or someone else did anyway. They let my abuser out of prison early today. You think half a day at work would put him in a better mood, but less time torturing the inmates means more time torturing me. And with that, our time together is coming to an end. If you have a story you'd like me to narrate, you can send it to me 3 different ways, either through my website, email, or subreddit. All the links are down below for easy access. Second of all, I'd like to thank my patrons and members for your support. You guys help keep the lights on around here. Thank you guys so much. Last but never least, I'd like to thank all the writers who let me read their stories. I enjoyed each haunting different tale, and as always, I do hope that every single one of them stays safe and away from such chilling tales for the future. Well, that happened to them. If you'd like to listen/read them, well, I hope you find many more. This was a wide variety from October of last year all the way to the newest one in March of this year. I hadn't done paranormal/ghost stories in a while, and though I ran out of time to really do a proper video, I thought a compilation for those who like longer listenings would be perfect. I am trying to do the compilations a little more. I normally hold them off for when I don't have time to narrate stories, which is what happened here. But I think I am going to try to throw one in every other month if I can. At the same time, I only go so fast and I put many videos into these, so it's a work in progress. But if you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. And of course, I would always love a comment, guys. I'd love to know what other kinds of stories you'd like me to narrate, or if you have any feedback, anything like that. If you're on the podcast, you can leave me a review if possible, as well as if you're on Spotify, there are questions you can answer, or you can just use that to comment stuff that you want me to know as well. And of course, if you'd like to help this channel/podcast grow, please share it with anyone who might enjoy it. It helps out quite a bit. And of course, if you'd like to help support in other ways, like I mentioned before, I do have Patreon and memberships. You get early access with it and a few other bonuses. And I also have PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and Super Thanks on YouTube if you just like to do a one-time kind of thing instead of a recurring. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It always has and always will mean the world to me. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.